Hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to my Game of the Month, British Chess Magazine's Game of the Month for March 2013. And it's a very interesting example of the McCutcheon variation of the French Defence. It's a game from the Armenian Championship, which was played in Yerevan in January 2013. Playing white is Robert Hovhannisyan, grade 2615, and playing black, Avetik Grigorian, grade 2599. Now the McCutcheon, as you'll recall, is introduced by two pins. In the classical variation of the French, white plays bishop g5, pinning the knight, and by far the most common line here is bishop e7, just unpinning, very safe. But combative players quite like bishop b4 here. Instead of bowing to white's pin, the power of the pin, black puts the knight on c3 in a pin himself. At first sight, this looks like a beginner's mistake. White can play e5, winning material. But it's not as clear as all that, and black responds with h6. If white goes bishop h4, then black can unpin further with g5. If white takes on f6, he can do this. This is one of the main lines, but he doesn't really get anywhere. And in particular, white's got to watch out for the potential power of the now unchallengeable dark squared bishop. So in practice, going back to our featured game, white moves the bishop backwards, and two moves tower over all the others in terms of popularity. Now white can go bishop d2, that's the main line, and then black takes off the knight and puts his knight in on e4. That knight on e4 is the linchpin of black's position in the McCutcheon quite often, and in this particular line the bishop on d2 feels a little bit exposed to the gaze of the knight. At certain points in many main lines, black just removes the bishop, drawing the white king out. So if there is a reason why you shouldn't play bishop d2, that might be it. Bishop e3, also very popular, and it has been shown that white can negotiate any tactics on c3 after knight e4, queen g4. But very interestingly, in our featured game, white plays a third move, a much rarer continuation, bishop to c1. Very peculiar looking move from such a strong player. But again, it's guided by the motivation that we want to keep this bishop out of range of the knight on e4, well, the knight on e4 to b. Now, if white, after bishop c1, if black does put his knight in on e4 here, white's certainly going to go queen g4. That is a typical jab in the McCutcheon from white, putting pressure on black's king side. And now black has to decide how he's going to resolve white's attack. Certainly taking on c3 is no good here. Queen takes g7. It's actually worthwhile going through the tactics of this line because they crop up in many similar variations of the McCutcheon. The problem for black is he doesn't have a decent move, despite the fact he can give numerous discovered checks with the knight on c3. For instance, well, if black plays rook f8, then comes bishop d2, and that's a bit awkward. Black can force a kind of queenless middle game here with knight takes a2, takes on d2, takes queen g5 check, but after takes c3, white is solidly better because it's really difficult for black to get his queenside pieces out. Going back to queen takes g7, the computer suggests king d7 as a possible way forward, but even there, bishop d2, black can get this queenless middle game again with queen g5 check, but it's not really an improvement. White just goes knight h3, forcing rook g8 more or less, and now f4. Again, very difficult position for black because he can't get those queenside pieces out very easily. So that is why black has to go g6, and now it's game on. Well, if we go back to our featured game, it's interesting. Grigorian answered bishop c1 with a tit for tat idea. He played his knight back to d7. Black says, okay, I'm going to play a classical variation. If you can play bishop c1, I can go backwards. No problem. Don't need to come into e4. And white played a3, whereupon black again went backwards. He sees no reason to cede the bishop pair here, playing bishop takes c3. So white goes queen g4, black plays g6, and now we get another kind of typical position. Well, you would think that g6 is inviting some sort of sacrifice on that square. White lines up with bishop d3, bishop takes g6, the game should be over quite soon. But it's never that straightforward in the McCutcheon. For instance, is white actually threatening to take this pawn? I don't think he is. Rook g8 would probably answer that very satisfactorily in the given position. So black can just get on with c5, and then the bishop on d3 is misplaced. White's got to be far more cunning than that if he wants to land a decisive blow against the black king side. So Alfanisayan decided, well, I can't really do anything here, I'm just going to get my pieces out, and black hits at the centre with c5. And you see, in this position, the knight on c3 is perhaps slightly misplaced, as white would probably like to play c3 here and maintain his pawn on d4. Instead, he's got to cede the centre or allow black to take on d4, when the pawn on e5 is probably quite weak. But after d takes c5, knight c6, he's still got certain problems to think about in the centre. Already, I think black is doing rather well here. Well, bishop b5 was played. Now, there are similar lines in other variations of the French, and there, white usually plays bishop f4. But curiously, black can utilise the position of the queen on g4 to actually gain some time here, with the remarkable d4, knight e4. I mean, this already looks terrible for black, but g5. And it might be that the white pieces on the king side can be pushed back in disarray. For instance, if white plays bishop g3, black already has h5 with a completely winning position. And if white goes bishop d2, well, again we can go h5, then g4, knight comes in, and now black takes on e5 with quite a good position, I think. I mean, if he goes knight d6 check, we can take that, go h4, continue hassling the white queen, and now even f5. Very strange pawn advance by black on the king side, but white can't exploit it. And meanwhile, black has threats. So white played in the game bishop b5, black took on c5, white castled, and now a6. If black's knight is removed, then I think the position is taking on characteristics of a kind of Sicilian Taimanov position, where black is very satisfactorily placed after, for instance, rook b8 here, or he could play a5, just intending one day to shunt that bishop out to a6, or at least giving him the option. So in the game, white retreated to e2, and the rest of this game will show that natural methods like this in the McCutcheon, against the McCutcheon, don't really work for white. I mean, what white has done here is just develop his pieces very straightforwardly. And actually, in the end, he gets quite a poor game. Black, meanwhile, is catching up in development fast, and he's already thinking of starting an attack against the white king. I think black is intending to castle on the queen side in this position, and then launch a kingside pawn storm, pushing those pawns forward, and in particular, using the exposed position of the white queen to gain time. h4. Well, that is a very controversial move, because white knows that black is going to castle long. He's getting rather worried about the prospects of the black kingside pawn advance coming very quickly. So he tries to stop it dead in its tracks. But whenever you make such a move in front of your own king, you have to ask yourself, is that move going to cost me in the long term? Is that going to help black to leave open the position on the king side, or is it going to hinder him? I suppose white could have continued with a move like bishop e3 here, but then knight d7. And the pawn on e5 is looking very tender. So h4 came, black castled on the queen side, white started the charge on the queen side as he probably should. Knight comes back to d7, and now white has to resolve the problem of that pawn on e5. So he put his queen back on g3. d4. Slightly embarrassing. White put his knight in the centre, and now black took on e5. Takes, queen takes, and I've no doubt at all that white was hoping that bishop f4 would bail him out, as when the black queen moved, the knight comes into d6, and white hopes to get terrific compensation using this dark squared bishop. But it doesn't seem to work out that way, as now the black attack really does gather momentum after the non-surprising move g5. Now White might have thought this wasn't possible because of bishop c7, and indeed this is the game. But if Black had wanted to play this really quite safely, he could easily have played rook d7 in this position. That's another good move. And if a4, we can go queen d5, forcing the bishop away, and we can even sack a pawn here with g5. So Black would have got his pawn lever in anyway. Takes, 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 rook g8. White is crushed. So going back to the game, Black decided to play g5 anyway. Rook d7 was rejected, but that was also good. Bishop c7, g takes h4. The white queen goes backwards, and now rook d7, bishop takes b6, rook g8. And now, as you can see, the black threats are really starting to build. Ideas such as knight e5 are coming very much to the fore, and ideas of knight f3 will surely follow. Hovhannissian played b5. Well, it's already hard to suggest moves. I mean, if he goes rook a d1, Black has the excellent move here, f6. White can't take on e6 because of queen takes d1. And otherwise, knight e5 follows. For instance, queen h3, knight e5. Black's really putting the pressure on. So b5, trying to get the attack. A takes b5, a4. That's the sort of thing you should do in opposite sides castling situations. Get onto the attack as quickly as possible. But Black's potential in this position is, I think, much greater than White's. He played f6, intending after a takes b5 to play knight e5 with the same horrible threats on f3. So after f6 in the game, White played queen h3, intending after knight e5 to run away with king h1. Now another excellent move by Grigorian. The whole game is played very well. He plays queen f5. Not a move that immediately comes to mind, but a very good move, exchanging off the actively placed white queen, which is also quite a good defender of the king. So off come the queens. Queen takes f5, e takes f5, and now rook a3, hoping to hold up the third rank. But now another superb move, knight to c4. And in view of the fork on a3 and b6, White's got to take that, after which g2 is looking very tender. And you know what? Black could have taken on g2 immediately, but he plays a much better move here. B takes c4. Now the threats to g2 are quite horrific. d3 is in the mix, followed by h3. In this opposite colour bishop middle game situation, I think we can confidently say White is now losing. What price the so-called bad French bishop? So rook e6 was answered by c3. d3 was also very strong. But c3 in the game. Rook takes f6. And now h3. Black has blocked the rook out of the game. Now he moves in for the kill. H takes g2 check. King g1. And now rook e7. Well, rook e1's a killer, so White must retreat. Black renews the threat of rook e1. And really, this initiative, this attack runs on oil wheels. King h2. Well, he can try f3, but we just take king h2, d3, takes rook e1. One of the pawns is going to queen. So king h2 was played in the game, and now we read the last rights on White's position. White's got to take that, Black recaptures. There's a check, a further check, one more check, king e5, and now in this position, White decided to resign, as the black attack is far too strong. So, very interesting stuff all the way through. Bishop c1 didn't seem to turn out that well, and it may be that the measured approach that Grigorian played in the opening phase of the game with knight fd7 might well be better than knight e4.